Chapters 10 and 11 was an interlude between the sixth and the seventh trumpet. So we're going to pick up here with the seventh trumpet, verses 11 or chapter 11, verses 14 through 19. And then my goal, hopefully today, if we are able to get through 12, although there's a lot in 12, so we may end up having to stop halfway between. So if someone will read 14 through 19, please. All right, thank you. Nice and loud. No, she's got it.
The second woe has passed, the third woe is coming soon. The seventh angel sounded his trumpet, and there were loud noises in heaven, which said, "The kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, and we will reign forever and ever." And the 24 elders who were seated on their thrones before God fell on their faces and worshipped God, saying, "We give thanks to you, Lord God Almighty, the one who is and was, because you have taken your great power and have begun to reign. The nations were angry and your wrath has come. The time has come for judging the dead and for rewarding your servants, the prophets, and your saints, and those who reverence in your name, both small and great, for destroying those who destroy the earth." And then God's temple in heaven was opened, and within his temple was seen the ark of his covenant. And there came flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, an earthquake, and a great hailstorm.
I do need to ask you a question. At the end of verse 15, does it say, "We will reign" or "He will reign"? Okay, good. Okay. You threw me for a loop. You said "we," and I was like, Judy looked up at me like, "Is that something wrong?" And I looked at her and I don't know. All right, verse 14 is a transitional verse. So if we go all the way back to chapter 9, there was an eagle mid-heaven that said, "Woe, woe, woe, woe," or "Watch out for the three woes," that type of stuff. And the three woes are most likely the three trumpets, last trumpets, although we don't get the last woe. Like after the fifth trumpet, you have the first woe is passed. Now we've gotten to the end of the sixth trumpet, and it says the second woe is passed. Watch out for the third. There is no the third woe is passed. And so we got to kind of deal with that when we get there. But most likely the three woes represent the three final trumpets, and the last woe is found in the next verse. So verse 15, we get this question, what does the last trumpet contain? Okay, an announcement maybe. Okay. The last seal, there were some questions as well. There's silence. Does silence contain the woe or the seal, or is the seal something else outside that? And so this question gets asked of this trumpet as well. Is it the voices or is it something else? I do think it's probably the voices. There's two songs that are given. The first is the announcement and then the song of praise, right? And I think that is those voices are telling us what is contained in the trumpets. So the first has a voice from heaven. We don't know whose voice, although we probably could say maybe the saints. That's probably what I'd lean towards. Maybe angels, maybe a collection. We have to talk about that, I think, in the next chapter, or chapter 13. We have the same issue. What is it the voice says? What does the voice say, announce in verse 15? Yeah, the kingdom has come, right? The kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of the Lord. When does that happen? What's that? Oh, after the third woe, maybe. But this is not a trick question. When does the kingdom of heaven become the kingdom of the end? Okay, yeah. I was trying to trick you up there. All right, so we're probably talking about end of time, right? So this trumpet is ushering in the end of time. All right, and we get that hint from the voice. We get also when we see the temple opening up. So we are at end of time. God and Christ reign forever and ever, right? Kingdom of our Lord and his Messiah. So Lord here is not Jesus, it's God, Messiah being Christ, right? All right. Then we get the second song. It's the response of the 24 elders. What do they do first? Right, they bow down and worship God again. They declare that God is and was and will be, right? Like that. Yeah, they actually don't say will be, but we get the assumption from past that they're including that concept. And then they note that the nations were angry, right? They were angry. Why were they angry? Probably, yeah, right. It says, even though they were angry, God's wrath has come. It just came to me. There's a psalm that kind of talks about that, but I forget the psalm, and so I won't dive into it. It just hit me. So no, it's I want to say like maybe 19. I don't know. Don't quote me there because I forget it. So, but it's one of the big psalms. It talks about the nations rage and roar, and then stuff with God. So, what we have here is judgment has come. God's wrath has come. Judgment has come. So even though the nations fight against everything that God is doing, God's judgment still comes. And so when God's judgment comes, there's rewards for the servants, right? And destruction for the destroyers of the earth, right? Those who destroy the earth is what he says. Which is probably just a code word for the wicked, non-Christians, whatever we want to say there. Then verse 19, a couple things happen. Cosmic signs. The temple opens and the ark is seen. What does that mean? What's that? Yeah, good job. All right. The ark is always representation of God's presence with his creation. And so for it to say the temple is open and we can see the ark, it's this idea of God being present. So again, just repeating what is said, right, from the first announcement, the kingdom of the earth has become the kingdom of our Lord. All right, God's presence is there. This is dived into, explained in Revelation 21 through 22 in greater detail, but we're getting hints at it. And then you have the cosmic signs. We've seen this twice already, once when the throne of God is mentioned, once at the end of the seals, and now we get it here. We do get some severity increase. Okay, it's not just a hailstorm, it's a right, but not just a hailstorm, a severe hailstorm. Thank you. Yeah. So we have that increase, and when we get to the end of the bowls, it'll be increased again. The severity has changed. So probably not saying that there's three separate ones, but rather just the discussion of the judgments have increased on exactly what it looks like. So, all right. I wanted to do that last week, but we ran out of time. So what do we learn from this? Oh, the phone is going to read to us. All right, Lord is in his control, yes. I focused more on the ark section of it and said God plans to be with his people when he makes the kingdom of the world the kingdom of the Lord. I focused on that one, but that's just my focus. So what you said is not bad or wrong. So
I have read or heard that the people have said they thought the ark was buried down underneath the dome. Is that right? I don't know. Okay.
There's an archaeologist, Ron Wyatt, that has made that claim. He's dead now, though.
Yeah,
right?
he said it was under the
Calvary.
Calvary,
Yeah.
the Skull Rock.
So, but they're in Jerusalem underneath. So I don't know. He's the only one that's really said that he's seen it. No one
Which
else.
there is a cave system under Skull Rock.
Yeah. So maybe. But I mean, at the same time, I still come back to it doesn't matter because the one that we do care about is in heaven with God, spiritually at least, right? And God's presence is among his people and his Holy Spirit that indwells us. So those are, if it's there, great. If it's not, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter is ultimately what I come down to on some of that stuff. So he's still in control. All right. Chapter 12 is a literary middle of the book of Revelation. Generally, almost every single scholar will say something different happens in 12 than in the first part of the book. And so almost every commentary you read will say there is a division there. All right. And so it becomes pretty ideal. Like you can tell the change once we start reading this, right? This is where we get very apocalyptic, more apocalyptic than before, right? It's one of those things. We're going to talk about it, but also starting from chapter 12 all the way to 20, we start talking about this person called the dragon. And his beasts. And they kind of serve as the literary driving point for chapters 12 through 20. And because of that, we usually say there is a break here. What is the break detail? We don't necessarily know. We'll just kind of talk about it as we go up. All right, so the imageries that pop up here will kind of change quite a bit. So I will go ahead and read all of 12, and then we will come back and discuss it. So. A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon around her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. And then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on its head. Its tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth, so that it might devour her children the moment he was born. She gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule all the nation with an iron scepter, and her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. And the woman fled to the wilderness to a place prepared for her by God, where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days. Then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. And then I heard a loud voice in heaven say, "Now has come the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God, and the authority of his Messiah. For the accuser of our brothers and sisters, who accuses them before our God day and night, has been hurled down. They triumphed over him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. They did not love their lives so much as to shrink from death. Therefore rejoice, you heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has gone down to you. He is filled with fury, because he knows that his time is short." And when the dragon saw that he had been hurled down to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. And the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, so that she might fly to the place prepared for her in the wilderness, where she would be taken care of for a time, times, and half a time, out of the serpent's reach. And from his mouth the serpent spewed water like a river, to overtake the woman, and to sweep her away with the torrent. But the earth helped the woman by opening its mouth, and swallowing the river that the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. And then the dragon was enraged at the woman and went off to wage war against the rest of her offspring, those who keep God's commands and hold fast to their testimony about Jesus. All right, so definitely differences. Here I think I got a great picture here. You got the woman with the wing holding a child, Michael arrayed in armors, and then the dragon down here, right? Ignore all the baby angels, so they're just to make it look pretty. So, all right, the chapter begins with the great sign. There's actually 2 signs. Okay, the verbiage here, he notes a change in subject matter. He's going to discuss two key figures in in chapter 12. The first one appears in verse 1 here and 2, and it is the woman. All right, who is she?
Mary?
Oh, thank you so much for saying that. I'm going to write that up here for later. Other opinions?
Maybe a nation or something.
Okay, maybe a nation.
You know, like Babylon.
Okay, I'll write that up here, but I'm going to cross it out as soon as I do. Probably not Babylon, because later on in chapter 17 we talk about the whore of Babylon. So we'll do somebody different than that. So
Eve,
Eve, okay.
Israel?
I mean, since, I don't know. I was just gonna say God, the representation of God.
Okay. You're gonna make all the feminists happy there.
Well, I mean, it talks about God being like a kin who cares for her chicks, so we don't necessarily know that God is gender bending.
God is asexual. God has no gender. Like you said, there's Old Testament passages where he's a father, and there's Old Testament passage where he's a mother, or a husband in the Old Testament, father in the New Testament. So he's neither. So I was just throwing it out.
We're all made in his image.
Right.
You can't be in his image if
Right.
he has
Right. All right. So there's a couple of things here that can kind of maybe help us. It does mention that she is clothed with the sun and stars, right? Stars on her head. We do have a passage in the Old Testament that hints at that. Anybody know?
Was it Joseph's dream?
Yeah, good job. Genesis 37. All right, Joseph has a dream where the stars, moon, and sun bow down to him. All right, so maybe that is what we should be thinking about here. If Joseph, he sees 11 stars, but if Joseph counts as the 12th star, then this woman maybe, most likely, probably represents Israel more than anyone else. The Jewish rabbis of the day were teaching that the 12 stars represent one of the midrashes about Genesis 37 says that the sun symbolized Abraham, the moon Isaac, and the stars were Jacob, along with the seeds of the patriarchs. Philo, another writer in this time period, considered that the number of the 12 tribes as a perfect number, and that the zodiac cycle was a copy of that. So the zodiac, I don't know if you know anything about it. There's 12 of them, and he's saying it's a copy of the perfect Israel. Similarly, in Song of Solomon 6:10, Solomon's bride is said to be as fair as the moon, bright as the sun, and majestic as the stars in possession. There's also later Jewish writers talking about that Song of Solomon 6:10 would say that it represents faithful Israel. Isaiah 61 through 62 mentions the bride of the Lord in a lot of this way. In 61:19 through 20, the bride is mentioned as having the sun and the moon, but no stars are mentioned. In 61:10 and in 62:3, she is said to have a crown of beauty and a royal diadem. And so I think what we have here is a blending of all of these images. One thing to keep in mind, what we're going to see throughout chapters 12 through 20, well, really 12 through 22, is a distinction between two women. Okay? The first is this woman here, who isn't given a name, but I think is given a name once we get to chapters 21 and 22, and the name is the Bride of Christ. The other woman in these chapters is what's called the whore of Babylon, or the harlot of Babylon. Okay, and so what you're going to have is this diametrically opposed people, right? The whore and the bride. And what you're going to get, especially once you get to like chapter 19, is the outcome of the whore, and then when you get to 21 and 20, you get the outcome of the bride. And so I would say that this woman probably, just based off these first parts, is God's faithful people. And I think it's more than just Israel. It's Israel in the Old Testament, church in the New Testament, although Paul, I think you can make an argument, says that they're both Israel. Like we are Israel, attached to Israel. And so I think if we just say faithful people of God, I think that's what we probably have here. But also the Old Testament faithful people of God, which weren't the church, right? So it's kind of like this, Rebecca. They were Hebrews, and then there were Israelites. Now the Israelites weren't Hebrews, but the Hebrews probably could be considered Israelites, and the Jews are Israelites, but not, right? Like you have a change in the names, and it's kind of sometimes hard to put them all together. So I try to put them. When I say names, I want it to be correct, right? So Jews are after the exile, but the Israelites before, and Hebrews before, really, they come into the promised land. And so when I say faithful people of God, I can include all of those people. So yes and no. Which then lets us know what the 12 stars are, right?
So how do you feel like Jewish people, are they still faithful people of God today?
I mean, if they're following the Messiah, yeah, sure. I mean, the New Testament says if you're not following the Messiah, you're not faithful people of God.
So that's what I thought. That's just clarifying what you.
Yeah. Which is why I don't want to call them Israel, because I think it's more than that. It's the faithful people, both new and old. Now, some of this is going to be before, and a lot of it's going to be after. But I think the first opening sections is the before Jesus side. So the 12 stars either represent Israel or the apostles. It doesn't really matter which one, because that number is a symbolic number representing the complete people of God. Okay, that's something we've talked about before. Okay, now we can talk about Mary here. This woman is pregnant and she gives birth. Who does she give birth to? Christ. Okay, we'll talk about why that is in just a second, but probably the most important seed is Christ. This woman, though, should not be equated with Mary, so we can cross her out. All right, probably not Mary, although Mary is probably symbolically the fulfillment of those promises, right? This woman is not Mary, though. All right, one of the discussions is the pain of childbirth. What is that? Is that meant to represent anything? Some people would say that it represents the suffering of God's people throughout time. However, I think that's probably reading too much into it. There's pain in childbirth, and I think that's all you should probably read on that. So maybe it's suffering. I put 3 question marks saying I don't think it's probably that. So.
Well, would it have something to do with the fact that after the humans fall would be the apple of God's?
Right, yeah, and that's where I'm saying is I think pregnant women often experience pain in childbirth, and so I don't think I don't think we should spiritualize those pains, right? What's that? Often. I have heard recent stories without the epidural, even like that they just had it and had no problems. Like, so not everyone, but most. I'll say most. How about that? Most often. I ought to clarify there. I've never experienced it myself, so nope. In verses 3-4, we get the second great cosmic figure, and that is the dragon. Okay, this is going to be your main antagonist throughout the rest of the book, especially chapter 12 through 20. He's been hinted at earlier. There's been a couple of passages in Revelation to this point that's talked about it, but now we're going to see what I think John is doing is he's taking some of the generics about people, and now he's going to the spiritual side of things and saying, here's what's really happening, and here's what's really going on. Okay? We do have some mosaic imagery here. Sorry, not mosaic, not Moses, but like a collage of imagery happening here when we talk about the dragon. The word dragon itself is mentioned several times by the prophets. It's the word that's usually translated Leviathan, or great sea monster. Anytime that word was used in the Old Testament, it often symbolized evil kingdoms. Okay, some of the examples are Psalms 74:13. 89:10, Isaiah 37, Isaiah 51:9, Ezekiel 29:3, Ezekiel 32, 2-3, Habakkuk 3, 1-8. And if you want those, I can get those to you. Most often, Egypt is the one that is designated with this term. Babylon is used as a term in Jeremiah 51:34. And the Psalms, in later Jewish writings, the Psalms of Solomon, so not Song of Solomon, but the Psalms of Solomon, 2:29-30, depicts Rome as the great dragon. So this is a common discussion amongst the Jews about the great dragon being the source of evil kingdoms. Okay, so you have that in the back there. We also have a collage from Daniel chapter 7. In Daniel 7, the fourth beast is said to have 7 heads, 10 horns, and 7 crowns, which is what this dragon has. And in Daniel, that fourth beast clearly represents Rome. Okay? So we could, to a great extent, see that the dragon represents an evil kingdom. But it's not just the evil kingdom itself. It is the ultimate power that lies behind the evil kingdom. The ultimate power behind anybody opposed to God's people is Satan. All right? So when Christians are persecuted, it's the result of the devil's work. We're told that he has 7 diadems. Why is that significant? Diadems, not diaphragms. Different things. Crowns. 7 crowns.
7 elders? Or is it a copy of something in heaven?
Yes, it's for sure a copy of something in heaven. 7 being perfection. And we'll talk about how next week we'll talk about how they imitate perfection, though they aren't. Crowns are a sign of sovereignty, right? And so what I think we have here is a claim to being the perfect king, but isn't, right? Is evil behind it. So he's at least claiming this role. In verse 4, we're told that, because who really is in control on earth? God, right? Like we've discussed that from chapter 4, right? God is sovereign over all of creation, and because of that, he's worthy of all glory, honor, and power and praise. And now here comes the beast, the dragon, that's claiming to have that same sovereignty. I have 7 crowns. I am perfection. And yet really isn't the one in control. Looks like it. And Rome, I mean, anybody that lived in Rome would have thought Rome looks like they have things under control. All right, but they aren't the ones truly in charge here. Verse 4 mentions that he has 1/3 of the stars that have been swept. Who are these? Thank you. I have a question mark. This verse has typically been used to say that 1/3 of heaven rebelled with Satan. Maybe. Okay. It does come from Daniel chapter 10, though. In Daniel chapter 10, we're told that. Let me read. Make sure I have it here. All right. In Daniel chapter 10. When the starry host is cast down, it's a metaphor for faithful Israelites enduring persecution. And so there's a passage where he says that stars are swept and fallen. And so if we consider Daniel, then maybe it's not angels, but maybe it's talking about the persecution of God's people. I don't know which one to go with. I probably lean more towards Daniel because John is definitely using Daniel quite a bit. I think I read recently like 1/2 of all of the Old Testament references in Revelation go back to Daniel. And so I think he has that in his mind when he says something like this. So what we have here is this dragon is against the faithful people of God. He's against this woman, and he's seeking to consume the child that she is about to give birth to. The child is born in verse 5. We know who this child is, and why do we know who this child is?
He's Messiah. I don't know.
Because God came and
Says one of the nations.
Yes, because we get a quote from Psalm 2. Okay, right? All the nation, he will rule the nations with an iron scepter. Psalm 2 is highly Christological and is used extensively throughout the New Testament to point to Jesus. Okay? Some of the examples. Acts chapter 4, Paul and John will use Psalm 2 to explain how God was working through the apostles in objection to the Jewish leaders. In Acts 2:36, the closing of Peter's first sermon, he will quote Psalm 2 to note that Jesus is the Messiah. Acts 13:33 has Paul quoting Psalm 2. Revelation uses Psalm 2 throughout the book, including right here. There's at least 8 references in Revelation to Psalm 2. Okay? And so we know because of how Christians were using Psalm 2 that this child is for sure Christ. He is the Messiah. Verse 5 is what's called a telescoping of history, right? Because the child is born and taken away immediately. But we know that Jesus was there for how long? Around 30, probably 33 years, right? Somewhere in that frame. So we have a huge telescoping of the life of Christ in one verse. He was born, he was taken away. That's it. Then the woman flees to the wilderness for 1,260 days, which is how long?
180 weeks.
Which is how long in years? 3.5. Yeah, 3.5. By this time, we shouldn't be surprised by that number, right? 3.5 or 42 months, depending on how we want to count. So,
Was that how long Mary was in Egypt?
it's a great question, Rebecca. I don't know. It'd be fascinating if it was. So we aren't told that, so I don't know there. So 3.5 years, of course, is Exodus imagery again. We've talked about this a little bit. John has mentioned that the Israelites were 40 plus 2 years in the wilderness. So 42 months. Here we got 3.5 years. And so really the question is, should we take all of these as separate times? So do we have 3.5 plus 3.5 plus 3.5 plus 3.5? I think it appears 4 times. So do we have 14 years? Are they separate time frames, or do they communicate the same thing just in different words? So we have 3.5. And if so, what is that imagery supposed to look like? And we talked about that a little bit last week, and I think the imagery is this idea of being in the wilderness, waiting for the kingdom of God to be the kingdom of the world, right? And so I think what we should think about is that. The wilderness, something that hasn't been discussed a lot, is that in Jewish thought, the wilderness was not just a time of trial, but a time of protection. And we don't think about that too often, but we do see that. Elijah will spend 3.5 years praying to God that it would not rain. And where did he stay in that 3.5 year period? In the wilderness. Jesus goes for a 40-day period into the wilderness. So we have not just trials that are happening, but also protection. And in Jewish thought, this is the case. John the Baptist, where was his ministry? In the wilderness. All right, so wilderness is not just a bad thing. It's also a good thing. Verse 7, so there's 3 visions in Revelation 12. We just read the first one, which is 1 through 6. 7 through 12 is I think it's through 12, is the second one. And then 13 through 17 is the third one. Okay, and so this is the second of those 3 visions. We'll see how many we get through here. In Daniel 7 through 12, we read that what happens on earth happens in a heavenly state. And so you have this discussion about Michael defending God's people against two other angels that are different nations. And so we have this understanding, and I think that's what's happening here. Okay, John, besides Daniel, we do have other Second Temple literature that says this. There's a midrash on Exodus 9:9, where a rabbi mentions that in the Exodus, the guardian angels of Egypt were judged, and Israel's angels executed judgment at the Red Sea. So while we might not think in that patterns, this is definitely John's way of thinking. What happens on earth is happening in heaven as well. And so what I think we have in this second vision is John suggesting that verses 1 through 6 is happening in heaven at the same time. So these, if we look at these visions chronologically, verses 1 through 6 are happening at the same time that verses 7 through 12, or 11, 12, I don't know. Okay, good. And then verses 13 through 17 happen after these two events. So this is a later vision, whereas these two are happening together, or sometime during the same period. Where am I at here? It says that war with Michael and the dragon happens. Their angels fight. Michael wins. Why does Michael win? Okay, how does God defeat Satan? There's a particular way.
Blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony.
There you go. That's how we win. But yes, the blood of the victory of Christ on the cross, right? The cross is God's victory. And so that's probably what Michael wins, because Jesus won. And I think that's what we should understand there. As a result, the dragon is cast down. This is something Jesus said in Luke 10:18 as well, right? Like the 72 come back and they say, hey, here's everything that we did. And Jesus says, I saw Satan fall from heaven. And I think he might even say like a star falls from the sky or something like that. All right, so we do see this.
You just think of the arrogance of Satan to think like even killing Christ, that somehow God's creation could hold him. It's like just dumb.
Yeah.
Theology. It's terrible. It's like,
Well, I mean, even his appearance, right? Like with the crowns, with the number 7. I mean, I think that's more significant than what we often get. I mean, he's placing himself up as a better option and thinks that he can win. So, here's something that I think we don't often think about. I think the dragon standing in heaven changes with Jesus' resurrection. So some of the events that we see in the Old Testament, especially in the book of Job, is very much a possibility before Jesus. And I think some of that changes after Jesus' resurrection. I think John's communicating that to us. And so now Satan has no standing in heaven because Jesus' victory has happened. But there's woe. I mean, we'll get to the woes in a second. There's woe to us as a result of that. Then we're explained a little bit further who this dragon is. He's the ancient serpent. What's in John's mind there?
Garden of Eden.
Yeah, probably Genesis 3, right? It's a serpent that tempts Eve, tricks Eve, and leads her astray. And this is the serpent that continues to lead the whole world astray. All right. And so I think in John's mind, he is thinking about Genesis in particular with that reference. And even now, the garden to today, Satan continues to trick us and to tempt us and to challenge us and to move us away from God. And I think what we're going to see is chapters 13 through 15 of Revelation is going to explain how he does that. Okay. So at the very end of this chapter, he says he goes off to make war with the seed, right? The woman and her seed. And so I think what we're going to see is an explanation of what that looks like. So, all right. Verse 10 through 12 says, there's a song that results, right? This dragon's fall results in praise. A loud voice is saying, but then when the loud voice is used, it starts using plural forms of the first person, right? Our brothers and sisters. Our God, right? And so we do have a question: one voice or many voice, or a collective voice together? I would say probably many. Again, either the saints in heaven or the saints with the angels in heaven without one voice cry out. What does the song tell us?
The dragon will be struck down or something?
He's already struck down. Salvation comes. Okay. Before that, they do mention that he is the accuser of God's people, which I think comes from Job 1. Right? Job 1, God calls all of his angels together, and here comes Satan, and he says, here's Job. Job, he's only faithful because you've protected him. And so then God allows protection to go, and all this stuff happens. And again, I think that's all pre-resurrection. After resurrection, some of those things don't happen the same way. Then he says, salvation, power, and the kingdom is now. And this is our traditional now but not yet in the New Testament. Throughout the New Testament, we have this sense that we experience stuff now, but we don't quite see it yet. So the kingdom of God is here now, but not fully, right? The kingdom will become this world when Jesus returns. Same thing. Salvation happens now. We experience the benefits of salvation now, but also not yet, because we still die as Christians, right? And so we get that sense in this. Salvation and power and kingdom are now, but not fully realized, which will be fully realized later in Revelation. And then how is the dragon overcome? We've mentioned it. The blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. Testimony being witness, which is that same word that eventually is used as a technical term for martyr. Martyr. It's a weird spelling. Okay. There's a Y in there because it's a U, an upsilon in Greek. What? In my head, I have to think about how it spells because I know how it is. All right. So, and again, one of the key things throughout Revelation is John wanting the Christians that he's writing to not compromise with the world. And he says the way that we overcome the dragon is by Jesus' blood and by being faithful. All right, don't compromise. Don't let the message disappear. Don't go to idolatry. If you go to idolatry, you will not overcome this dragon that has now come to the world, right? And so there's rejoicing in verse 12 along with woe because the dragon now rampages here. All right, and he says the dragon will rampage because he knows his time is short. I did all that without looking at my notes here, so. Yes and no. Oh, not an actual dragon. Yeah. And what did he mean by dragon compared to what we think of dragons? That's another question to keep in mind there. But yeah, so like there are things that we see happen in real life that have spiritual aspects to it. And I think that's that's the point of why he's even going to Daniel chapter 7 and 8, talking about Michael, because Michael appears one spot in the Old Testament. And so the moment we hear that name, we should instantly think Daniel chapter 7 through 12, because that's the only spot where he appears. And all of Daniel 7 through 12 is this idea that there's a spiritual reality. So there's a spiritual side to our physical reality. And we, as enlightened people, post-enlightenment, we tend to ignore the spiritual side of things. But everything has spiritual side to it. And so we have to, I don't know how far I want to go on this rabbit trail. That's what I'm trying to decide
Well, I
here.
just remember like a few weeks ago we talked about one of the plagues and how you think that we
It's more of a spiritual side of things, but we will see the effects of it
right,
in reality.
right.
And I think we're going to see, once we start diving into the beasts next week, I think we're going to see some very real examples, even in our modern world, of governments and religious institutions that promote the dragon over Christ. Man, you got me hooked on that book right now, The Return of the Gods, and it's a great. I don't agree with all of the things that he talks about, but it's a great understanding of where our culture is. I think he's analyzed that 100% accurately, and it's a book called Return of the Gods. Khan, and if you ever pick that up or get, I mean, it's on Hoopla as an audiobook, is phenomenal in explaining how we got where we are now, as far as the idolatry that our world is. Return of the Gods.
Messianic Jew, so his ideas might be more based in Judaism a little bit than ours are. I don't know.
What was his name again? Cahn. But reading Revelation, then reading or listening to that, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, yes, for sure. All right, I only have a page and a half of notes, so let's dive into this last one. It goes rather quickly compared to the others. We come back to the third major vision here: a return of the dragon, the woman. We're told that the dragon, then, now that he's been cast down, couldn't consume the Christ child. Lost his war in heaven. He now is seeking the woman, but she finds protection. Okay, so the church is not unprotected. Great eagle wings are given to her, and she is rescued. That's why that picture had her with wings on it from earlier. We could probably think about Exodus 19. We read that a couple weeks ago, right? Where God lifted Israel out on eagle's wings to Mount Sinai. We could think of that. We could also think of Isaiah. He says something very similar. And so that can be in our Isaiah 40:30. I don't have that written here, but I have it written up there. So cool. She's protected for that 3.5 year period. And again, I think it's probably the same period. It's not tribulation. It's not that. It's talking about the wilderness setting. All of that. So while she is protected, the dragon unable to, and I think, remember, Jesus also said that the church will not be overcome, right? And I think that should be in our minds too.
I remember talking to a guy one time when we were talking about Revelation and the end times, and they said, well, America's not mentioned in it. And I guess he's kind of a heretic because he pointed at that passage and he's like, see, that's
Oh, the eagle?
representation of America.
Yeah.
I don't think that's right.
That's why we did the bald eagle instead of the turkey, right? He's probably even talking about the Palestinian eagle rather than the bald eagle. So, yeah, I would agree with your assessment. So, now again, the church is protected; it will not fall to the dragon, at least during that time period. So he does use a different tactic. What is his different tactic then? Well, before that, he still goes after the woman. What does it say in verse 15 through 16? Yeah, he tries to drown her, right? Water comes from her mouth, but the earth consumes it. I do think this water is probably symbolic. I think what's more important is where it originates. And it originates in his mouth, right? And I think the serpent's tactics Here. Yeah, water from mouth. Okay, I think the serpent's tactics are the same from the beginning to now. So what did he do to trick Eve? Lied to her and slandered God, right? God doesn't know what he's talking about. You're not going to die. He just doesn't want you to be like him, right? Slanders God and lies. And I think that is what we see his tactic against the church. Slanders and lies. Okay? Now, the faithful church can resist such slanderous attacks. And the way that we do that is by being faithful and good. 1 Peter 3:15 through 17 says, always be ready to give an account. But in that passage, he also says, when people besmirch you, when they slander you, and then look at your life, they should not be able to stand firm. Because if Joe over here is such a good person, and I go around saying how much of a bad person he is, who does it look bad upon?
Both of you?
Probably me more than Joe, right? Like if I know Joe and I know that he would never steal, right? And someone's saying, oh, he's a thief left and right. Sticky fingers, right? Sticky finger Joe. I know that that's not true, and it looks bad on the person saying those things. Okay? And that's what Peter says, is if you are good, if you are faithful, if you're upright and righteous, no matter what the world says, you can stand firm. The problem is we're not always that good, right? And that's where the church has gotten in troubles, right? I think in our modern world, we see this. Our current culture often sets itself up against Christians, not because we are wrong in our thinking, but because of the bad image and moral failures of Christians. And so they're able to say Christianity can't be true. If it was, Christians wouldn't act this way. Now, some of that's their failed interpretation of Scripture. We do need to recognize that. But Christian character is important. And so I would encourage you, especially since the world is going to attack us and lie about us and slander us. And so that calls us to be more righteous. Not that we're self-righteous, but that we are living according to God's standard. Verse 17 ends, the dragon unable to conquer the church goes off to attack individual Christians. I think that's the difference. He can't defeat the church, so he'll attack us individually, which I think is, again, something Peter says, right? There's a lion waiting to attack us. All right, what do we learn from chapter 12? Yeah, I think we can definitely learn that. Yeah, the church itself will not fall.
God's presence and God's providence.
Yeah, presence and providence, protection, and care for his people. I wrote down, Satan is defeated by the cross. The victory is won. Now we only await the return of the king. I'll go J.R.R. Tolkien on us here for a second. And something I said last week, the current attack against Christianity is on the historical reliability of the Bible. And if they can attack the historical reliability and get it to be proven false, then we can say everything else in it is not true. And so that just goes along with that same thing. If we can prove that there wasn't a flood, or if we can deny it over and over again,